Today, I would like to discuss a very distinctive group of Parthian figurines. This is a typical example of the kind of Parthian figurine I'm talking about. There are also more detailed examples of the figurine. This has a man and what appears to be his wife reclining on a couch. This is an atypical example of the figurine. As we can see, a male figure with a sword. There's, of course, variation on the theme, but the theme is a distinctively dressed person. Who is this person? Is this person the deceased? Is this person perhaps the founder of a dynasty? There aren't any attributes suggesting that this person is a deity. There's nothing like a nimbus. There's nothing suggesting that they were gods in any supreme sense. But could they have been venerated ancestors? I say yes. Briefly, many of these figurines were recovered by 19th century British archaeologists who explored northern Iraq. This is ancient Mesopotamia. They found what they termed to be slipper coffins with these figurines associated with the bodies. They also found figurines like this in cities, towns, and villages. There's no hard and fast rule about where these figurines could be found. However, given the nature, scope, how so many Parthian burials recovered, it's clear that there is an association of these figurines with burial. We can explore the nature of the Parthian period. Briefly, this is 250 BC to AD 225. This is after the conquests of Alexander. So at first, the Parthians had a relationship with Greeks. Sometimes this was a hostile relationship in terms of battles, whereas at other times it's clear that the Greeks and Parthians shared much. Arsaces, the founder of the dynasty, was held in such high esteem by later rulers that they took on his name. They said on coins their name was Arsaces. They also had other names that's revealed on coins and on other documents. We don't have good documents from the Parthians themselves. We have classical sources, Greek and Roman authors, who comment on the Parthians. Most scholars assume that Arsaces was a Eastern Iranian-speaking tribes person. His tribe was the Parni, a Dahe tribe who conquered Parthia. In around 250 BC, the Parthian state was more mobile than it would be later. What would become Parthia was occupied by the Greeks. The Greek governor, who declared himself independent and said he was a king, went against Arsaces, and sadly for him, he lost. This meant that this tribe, the Dahe, who conquered Parthia, had land associated with them. They were no longer nomads going from place to place. They had a definitive place. They began to settle. It was at this time when they no doubt began picking up aspects of Greek culture, but as I mentioned before, there was also warfare. There was also direct conflict with Greeks. Arsaces II lost control over Parthia in 209 BC to Antiochus III, a Greek general who pushed further east than before. The Parthians, the Dahe, became his vassals for about 25 years. The traditional start of the Arsacid or Parthian dynasty is 250 BC. But what does this represent? Vesta Curtis suggests that this represents when the founder of the dynasty was made chief of the Parni tribe. This is not necessarily when the Seleucids lost control of the region. As I mentioned before, there are a few sources that discuss this. They are from a Greek and Roman perspective. And of course, we can assume that there was another side to the story that we're not getting. A tradition from the 1st century AD suggests that Arsaces was a descendant of the Achaemenid ruler Artaxerxes II. This individual lived in the 5th century BC, so it's quite a stretch. Is this a real genealogy, or is it a false genealogy to bolster a claim for rulership? No one can be sure, of course. There's a long tradition in the Near East of reconstructing flattering genealogies. The Parthian Empire had no unified culture. As I mentioned before, they were nomads at first, and they settled. A good example of their dress is here: trousers, a long shirt. The trousers would have been useful for riding a horse, whereas a Greek toga would be less effective. They're also associated with a distinctive headgear that is associated with nomads. Over time, Greek and Iranian deities became fused. The religion practiced at this time was Zoroastrianism. However, it was not centralized as it would be later in the Sasanian period. For example, the Greek deity Zeus was often equated with Ahura Mazda, the main god of Zoroastrianism. Ahura Mazda created everything, and it was evil that completed the duality. As a rule, however, Parthian communities, in other words, groups of people during this period, were polytheist. In other words, they did not adhere to any duality, good and evil. They worshipped a number of different deities. This is not surprising because, of course, the Greeks were polytheists, and many local communities worshipped local deities. It's also notable that the Parthian kings regarded themselves as deities. This is clear from coins, and other documents suggest that they took on many of the trappings associated with the worship of deities. The earliest Arsacid coins show rulers wearing a soft cap with cheek flaps. This is known as the bashlik. This kind of cap is used even by nomads today and would be made of felt and was perfect for protecting the wearer from harsh climate. This was also worn as a badge of office by satraps or governors during the previous Achaemenid period. The earliest coins of Mithridates I, who ruled from 165 to 132 BC, show him wearing the soft cap, the cap that Arsaces wore. However, coins from the latter part of this ruler's reign show him for the first time wearing a royal diadem. Mithridates II, who ruled from 121 to 91 BC, was first shown wearing the Parthian tiara. This was the same felt cap adorned with a variety of things, pearls, jewels, things that no doubt would have been very striking in person and can only be guessed at from coins and from figurines. This is an example of the kind of tiara that he would have worn. It appears to a modern viewer to look like a crown. Parthian rulers were acutely conscious that they occupied a dual sphere of influence. The first is Iran, and they called themselves, like the Achaemenid rulers before them, the king of kings. They ruled over local petty kings. They also said on their coins that they were Philhellenes. That means friends of the Greeks. The word Philhellene was described on Parthian coins until the reign of Artabanus II, who ruled from 126 to 122 BC. Vologases I, AD 51 to 78, was the first Arsacid ruler to have Parthian script and language appear on his coins, along with garbled Greek. This shows something important in that some people would have expected the coins issued by the Parthians to have Greek writing on them, although it's unlikely many people could have read that Greek. The use of Greek alphabet legends on Parthian coins remained until the collapse of the empire. This figurine is a good example of Greek culture in the Parthian Empire. The exact identity of this person is unclear. Considering that it was mass-produced, it's unlikely of an individual. Perhaps it is of a deity. Be that as it may, this figure is wearing what looks like a tall headdress and perhaps a veil pitched over her head. She's also wearing flowing robes and jewelry. This figure would have been perfectly at home in the Greek world. We have Parthian figures who are dressed like nomads, and we have Parthian figures of women who are, for all intents and purposes, Greek. Does this show that women followed Greek fashion and that men followed more rugged, nomadic fashion? It's quite possible, or at least that's how they wanted to be seen. I'd like to move on to discussing Greek burial practices with the understanding that, of course, we have good texts that describe Greek burials, and we have good archaeological evidence that describes Greek burials. It might cast some light on what we're seeing in the archaeological record. During the Hellenistic period, which the Parthians occupy this period, graves were of a standardized type. Basically, the Hellenistic period is from the death of Alexander in 323 BC to the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony in 31 BC. At this time, funerary monuments, funerary steles, show the deceased usually sitting or sometimes standing, clasping the hand of a standing survivor, which is often considered to be the spouse. When a third onlooker is present, this is assumed to be an adult child or perhaps a servant. There are a few Parthian figurines that follow this trend. This is a good example, unfortunately not in that good of condition, but we see a woman standing or perhaps sitting here, and we see the fragmentary man here. It follows a well-known type of Parthian figurine. There was an elaborate ritual in the Greek world for laying out the dead and preparing the dead for burial. This would have been done by the female relatives of the deceased. There would have been a variety of washings and offerings that would have taken place. After burial, there was a feast, which in some ways could have been regarded as a reward for doing all these things for the deceased. The dead were commemorated at certain times known as Genesia. Exceptional individuals might receive cultic maintenance in perpetuity. This is in contrast to normal people. Normal people, after a few generations, seem to merge in with the general dead. In other words, they became the collective dead. In some areas of Greece, they're referred to as the thrice ancestors. These people also had annual festivities devoted to them, but their names would have been forgotten. But for heroes, the situation was different. Their names were not forgotten, and they were regarded as beings that could directly help or directly hurt people, depending on how they were treated. But let's just back up a minute and look at how this differed from Roman practice. Roman emperors became gods. They ascended Olympus, and they became fully deities. For the Greeks, a hero lived underground. They were not quite full deities, but they were certainly more powerful than just humans. There are a couple notable exceptions to this, being Heracles and Asclepius. These people, while originally mortal, were honored by becoming gods. But let's return to Greek practice on a more mundane level. Culture heroes demand respect. Culture heroes could have done one thing in life and could be quite petty in death. They could come back as animals, say as a snake, and wreak vengeance on someone who doesn't pay them proper respect. A Pythagorean saying advises people not to eat food from the ground because it now belongs to heroes. Cult heroes can turn malicious. In a fragmentary play by Aristophanes, a chorus of anonymous heroes described themselves as senders of lice, fever, and boils. This is clearly something that no one would want to deal with. Angry, supernatural spirits. The earliest written reference to a hero cult is attributed to Dracon, the Athenian lawgiver of the 7th century BC. He prescribed that gods and local heroes should be honored according to ancestral custom. In other words, this had been going on for some time before that date. Other written sources suggest that veneration took place at tombs and in special sanctuaries built to venerate these spirits. In Homeric Greek, heros refers to a man who fought during the Trojan War on either side. By the historical period, this specifically meant dead person who was venerated and propitiated at his tomb or a designated shrine. As an example, offerings were made to Bronze Age heroes at Bronze Age ruins. The names of these people were not preserved, and perhaps only some shadow of their deeds were preserved. Large Mycenaean tholos tombs were often the sites of these cults, and sometimes they bear ostraca that are scratched to the heroes or to the hero. Does this mean that epic literature like the Iliad or Odyssey are late recreations, or perhaps totally late creations that depict a heroic past that never existed? This is something that will be argued for a long time to come. It's important here to state that the culture hero, the cult hero, was not ancestor worship. The culture hero was worshipped by the polis, or the state, the group of people, and the hero was not supposed to have any direct familial relationship with the person that was venerating them. There would be a political reason why these people should be venerated. They created the state and they occupy the same ground. It's unlikely that any Greek in the classical era could have, even at the time, laid claim to direct ancestry to somebody who lived in the Bronze Age. Founder cults existed all throughout the Hellenic world, both in Magna Graecia and Sicily. There was a cult at the grave of a founder of a city or town, the oikist. Under Parthian rule, Zoroastrianism fragmented into a variety of local cults. There were a synthesis between Iranian and Greek deities. This did not continue with the Sasanian period. There was a far more centralizing authority in the Sasanian period. Ardashir I, the ruler of Fars, revolted against his Arsacid overlords and killed the last Parthian, Artabanus V, in 224 AD. He established the empire that would rule until the 7th century Muslim conquests. Under the Sassanids, Orthodox Zoroastrianism was revived, and the region would undergo numerous important developments, such as a codification, a writing and preservation of holy texts like the Avesta. After Ardashir I had deposed the last Parthian king, he sought the aid of the high priest, who wrote a letter to a vassal king stating that the usurpation of this first Sasanian monarch was justified because this Sasanian monarch was to restore the proper faith. The high priest, Tansar, would later hope to oversee the formation of a single centralized Zoroastrian, for the lack of a better word, church. This was firmly under the control of the priests, or the magi. So what do the figurines suggest? This is a very important consideration because we have so few political texts from the Parthian point of view. Outside of coins, there is very little, shockingly little. So we have to massage the archaeological evidence somewhat. But we can say that there is evidence for a cult of the founder during the Parthian period. As an example, this figure with the sword is likely not the deceased. I would suggest that this would be of the founder. This person may represent an amalgamated vision of the founder with the deceased. And of course, the figure of a man and his wife would be in a similar vein. There might also be examples of local cult deities who were expressed in the figurines. This could be Anahita, for instance. Something like this could be a plaque of a particular Parthian ruler, whereas I noted before, this might be something that would be more at home in the cult of a founder or culture hero, cult hero. With the Sasanian reforms, religious reforms particularly, these cults would have been suppressed, though perhaps not destroyed. This is the same kind of thing that is chronicled in the Bible, a constant battle between center and periphery for control of the culture. Whereas during the Parthian period, control was relatively diffuse, under the Sasanians, it was definitely more centralized, perhaps around a local cult center or series of cult centers. Later on, of course, we're very sure that with the coming of Islam, the Zoroastrian faith, all these Iranian faiths, Greek faiths, were replaced with the worship of a single deity. No local cults were allowed to survive for long. There are many interesting things that can be done with figurines, and one can only hope that there will be further controlled excavation to show us exactly where these figurines, and perhaps give us an indication of how they were used. Thank you very much for your time.